Podium PC. I'd like to call this meeting of Lakewood City Council for Monday, October 15th to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barth. Councilmember Boki. Councilmember Brandstetter.
Here.
Councilmember Moss. Here. Councilmember Simpson.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Whalen.
Present.
Mayor Anderson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Now, would you all please rise with me in a moment of silence in honor of our men and women serving overseas, followed by the flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We now move to proclamations and presentations. I would ask Ms. Diana Holler to join me at the podium as we recognize Carter Lake Elementary School's 2019 calendar winners and present certificates of appreciation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and member of the council. As you know, every year, the City of Lakewood Stormwater Division does an outreach calendar for our public education and outreach. We work with every elementary school in the Clover Park School District, and this marks our 8th year of doing this calendar. However, this is our first time working with the Joint Base Lewis McCord Elementary. We chose Carter Lake Elementary School. Every year, I get to go assembly style and speak to the students about common ways that our stormwater gets contaminated and polluted. And I ask the students to draw a picture to illustrate this for me so we can use them in our calendar. Some of the messages are pollution and illegal dumping, fish-friendly car washing, the all-time favorite, which is picking up your dog waste, where does stormwater really go, and using less fertilizer in your yard, natural yard care. 13 pieces of art were chosen this year, 1 for the cover and then 12 for the months. And today, some of the students from Carter Lake Elementary are here to be recognized for their contribution to our calendar. I know that not all have been able to make it. This is a school that's based on the military base, and many of those students parents have been deployed to other places, so we'd like to recognize them as well. And then I'd also like to say thank you for your service. We had 1,000 calendars printed. We gave approximately 500 to the school, 200 to the Lakewood Chamber of Commerce for distribution, and the rest are given to local businesses that deal with stormwater and environmental issues. And with that, thank you, and I'd like to have the mayor give the students their certificates.
Well, this is always a pleasure. I'd like to show you those in attendance an example of the artwork on the cover and Dirty Earth, Clean Earth for January. I'd like Council Member John Simpson to help me distribute these. Please, when I call your name, come up, and Council Member Simpson will give you a certificate. Stay up here. Please go over by Ms. Moss over there and form a line, because we're going to take pictures afterwards, okay? So the cover and December is Jasur Johnson from Mr. Razzo's class. Okay. January is Paula Hernandez from Mr. Wiedeski's class. Congratulations. February, Kylie Courts from Mr. Lott's class. March, no, can't get away yet. March is Caden Smith, also from Mr. Wiedeski's class. Caden. April is Haley Hofstetter from Mr. Wiedeski's class. Is Haley here? Don't see her checked off. May is Addison Kendall from Ms. Huntley's class. June is Isaiah Rojas from Ms. Razzo's class. July is Nayeli Vasquez Merced from Ms. Wilson's class. August is William Poston from Ms. Wilson's class. I don't have anybody for September, October, November, and December checked off. Were there any other recipients out there? So I'll read through them. September is Kenyon Millett from Ms. Wilson's class. Kenyon here. October is J.T. Searfrost Jr. from Ms. Wilson's class. November is Yerlis Torres Merced from Ms. Hundley's class. And we're back to December with our cover girl. So, thank you all for showing up tonight, and if the council would come down, we'd like to take a picture with the award recipients who are here. Next item is a proclamation declaring October as Disability Employment Awareness Month. And ask Ms. Janet Smith, the Program Manager of Professional Contract Services, Inc., to join Deputy Mayor Wayland at the podium.
How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
See you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Smith, for joining us today. Here in the city of Lakewood, we recognize that Americans with disabilities are entitled to the same rights and freedoms as any other citizen, including the right to dignity and respect in the workplace. And whereas the Americans with Disabilities Act provides anti-discrimination protection for our nation's 56 million Americans with recognized disabilities, and we also recognize their right to be contributing, productive, and valued citizens of our country and our state. And whereas people with disabilities are an irreplaceable resource, not only to the workplace, but also to our community life. And whereas workplaces welcoming of all talents of all people, including people with disabilities, are a critical part of our efforts to build an inclusive community and a strong economy. And whereas the city of Lakewood celebrates the many and varied contributions of people of all abilities. And now, therefore, the city of Lakewood and its city council proclaims the month of October as Disability Employment Awareness Month here in the city of Lakewood, and we urge all citizens to join us with appropriate programs, activities, and events. Proclaim this 15th day of October 2018, Don Anderson, Mayor. And we are especially proud to present this tonight to you and invite you to say a few words if you'd like. We'll get Bryn will, of course, love to take a photograph for posterity.
Thank you, Member and City Council. We really appreciate at PCSI receiving this proclamation in your support of employing people with disabilities. PCSI is an Ability One company, so we employ people with disabilities to include wounded warriors and veterans. We have a contract on JBLM, And so 90% of our direct labor is done by individuals with significant disabilities. And so we're able to provide workplace accommodations that provides our employees with the opportunity to have meaningful employment, which they would not be able to have out in the competitive workforce. So this really means a lot. We appreciate your providing the proclamation for us and to support us in this mission during the month of October. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move to our business showcase, highlighting Lakewood's Best Western Motor Inn in the Colonial Center. And Jacqueline, would you please join me at the podium? Also a member of our Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. Well, it's always a pleasure to represent the businesses in Lakewood who had not only employment, but stability and community. Whether you're in town visiting family and friends or in Lakewood for an extended period, when you stay at the Best Western Lakewood, you are family, located within the Lakewood Colonial Center shopping district and across the street from the historic Lakewood Theater. The hotel boasts beautifully landscaped grounds, an outdoor swimming pool, and 78 recently renovated guest rooms. The hotel has been a mainstay in Lakewood for 54 years. Clients range from people passing through on their way to Canada or Oregon or California to those looking for something a little bit more permanent. Oftentimes, when a major event is planned in Lakewood, Best Western is a quick partner with the agency putting on the event to offer a place for visitors to stay. That has been the case with the city's Summerfest Triathlon and annual track competitions at Fort Steilacoom Park. Amenities at the hotel property include a free continental breakfast and internet access. The hotel is within walking distance of the Lakewood Town Center with its restaurants and shops. Because of its commitment to supporting the community and its 54-year history in Lakewood's historic Colonial Center, the Lakewood City Council recognizes the Best Western Lakewood as its October 2018 business showcase. So Jacqueline, I'd like you to accept this recognition on behalf of the city, and hopefully you can display it at the property proudly. And if you could come down, council. Go down here and take a class. We now move to the public comment section of our agenda. This is when any member of the public may speak to any issue of pertinence to city, whether or not it is on the agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. When called, please approach the podium. Identify yourself by name and city of residence, such as Marie Barth, Lakewood, Washington. And the yellow light will come on at 30 seconds as a warning. Red light comes on when your time is up. First person who signed up to speak is Dennis Haugen.
Dennis Haugen, Lakewood, Washington.
So the bowling plant.
I was able to get access
So you catch on to what she's talking about. Phony narratives about how immigrants are being treated on the border in order to frustrate Trump's attempts to enforce immigration laws. We have several, and I'm going to mention one, Democrats right here running for office that, in my opinion, are not fit for any office inside the boundaries of the U.S. government, U.S. territory. When you're in office, you take an oath to uphold the laws of the United States, no matter what level of government you're at. I asked Christine Kilduff and Maya Espinosa, where's your first concern? The American parents who lose their children permanently by murder to illegal aliens, or the ones that are just temporarily separated at the border to protect them from the fact that you might be a trafficker? She jumped right into the sewer, started with that phony narrative. Oh, I don't believe we should be hurting people. It's a phony narrative. It's been done by many different procedures when people get arrested for doing illegal things. Vote for Espinosa. She's much smarter.
Next person who signed up is Matt Perry.
Well, good evening, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Matt Perry. I'm with Puget Sound Energy. I work out of an office on South 38th Street in Tacoma, Washington. PSE has reviewed resolution number 2018-14 and resolution number 2018-15 and appreciates this opportunity to provide the City Council with our comments on the proposed pavement degradation fee, or PDF. Working with your staff and with other utilities, PSE previously provided comments on the proposed PDF in a letter to Mayor Anderson dated October 5th, 2018. We would like to provide the City Council with a copy of these comments for your further review and consideration. Respectfully, we think the proposed resolutions are both unfair and legally flawed and should not be approved by City Council this evening. We agree with the objective of the resolutions, which we understand to be maintaining the integrity of the city's infrastructure. This is an important objective for the city, its citizens, and all of us, including at Puget Sound Energy, that use and rely on safe and reliable city streets. The proposed resolutions, however, will not accomplish this objective. Rather, at least in the case of PSE, the resolutions apparently overlook commitments we have already made to maintain the integrity of the city's streets and therefore are inconsistent with and impair rights we negotiated under our franchise. PSE has already agreed to fully restore any damage that it causes to the public right-of-way. Section 6 of our franchise, ordinance number 403, states, and I quote, PSE shall, after any installation, construction, relocation, maintenance, or repair of facilities within the franchise area, promptly restore the franchise area to at least the same condition as existed immediately prior to any such installation, construction, relocation, maintenance, or repair in accordance with city standards at its sole cost and expense. The franchise goes on to say that the Public Works Director shall have final approval of the condition of the franchise area after restoration. As noted in our letter to Mayor Anderson, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals addressed a very similar conflict between a utility franchise and a pavement degradation fee ordinance. The court not only ruled in the utility's favor, but the court awarded the utility its legal fees. This case suggests that the city is headed down the wrong path with the proposed resolutions. The better approach is to continue to work within the context of our franchise agreement and to use the tools we put in place in our franchise to address street repairs. We owe our customers an obligation not to spend their money imprudently. Under our franchise, we have agreed to spend these resources to restore and maintain the integrity of the city's infrastructure when we cut or damage any city streets. We stand behind this obligation and are fully committed to continue to work with the city in the context of our franchise. We therefore respectfully urge the City Council not to adopt the resolutions or, in the alternative, to limit the applicability of the resolutions to utilities that have not otherwise committed to address street repairs in their franchises. Thank you.
Next person who signed up is Mr. Glenn Spieth.
Glenn Spieth, Lakewood. I hate to come up and complain, but the sound system is still having a problem. The city council meetings can be heard, but not at probably a good level, because if you turn it up much louder, you get feedback from all these speakers on the ceiling. What's really a problem is the study sessions are all down here and right underneath the speakers. So you have to turn it down a lot further in order to hear what's going on. Or I mean, to use the mics without feedback. Now, I spent 10 years running a audio repair shop here in Lakewood, and that was repairing speakers, amplifiers, stereo equipment, etc. My suggestion is that you get some good quality speakers behind these rock outcroppings here on both sides, aim them out toward the audience, and keep them behind the concrete. And disconnect those, because the level from up there is causing the feedback. Now, help, I've got test equipment that can work with this. I got spare speakers. I can rig up a temporary thing just to test it. But it's very difficult during study sessions to keep hearing what's going on. Now, even up there, if you don't turn your mic on, it's very difficult to tell what's going on. Some of you are very low volume speakers. Some, like Mike Brandstetter, he can be heard most of the time, especially if he's got his mic on. He's loud enough so most everybody can pick up on that. Last study session, I participated in the Arts Fest. And I had a Amelia Earhart display there for all of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I thought it was a well-attended group. A lot of local authors. I didn't think to bring my book, also being an author, but I didn't have any copies available, so I couldn't do that. But I did have the Amelia Earhart exhibit there, so thank you.
The next person who signed up is Hans Heckman.
Good evening, Mayor Anderson, members of council. For the record, I'm Hans Heckman. I live in Tacoma, although Lakewood is like a second home to me of sorts. When I was a kid, my family had a business in the Colonial Center, and I was lucky enough to be able to, we were members out at Oak Brook, so I had a lot of fond memories of good summers out there. I'm here tonight to speak to you regarding the resolution 2018-14 and 15. We were a party to the joint letter previously submitted, and here tonight just to follow up on that and remind you that the rights-of-way serve multiple purposes other than just surface traffic for vehicles. As utilities, we are there because that is the place where we can be. We pay our fair share. Comcast, we pay 11% of our gross revenues to the city every year. Last year, that was over $1.8 million. We also comply with your high restoration standards. If I'm not mistaken, you just updated those in 2016. Like many cities, you're looking to preserve your rights of way. You guys are doing a good job of that. You have high standards. We comply with that at a higher cost to us as part of our project, but in many cases, we are restoring the streets to a better condition than they were before. These fees I don't see them as really compensation for damages. Damages are typically something that you have surety on as to what they are. And at best, and according to staff's own memo, they are an estimate of a potential damage to the right-of-way. However, most rights-of-ways already have a cut or two in them. They're at some point in their lifespan, and when a project comes and goes, they're likely to be cut again before the end of their life. So it's all very much an estimate as to what the damage would be for, if in fact it does exist. In addition to that, the monies are not tied to that specific right-of-way or paying for that specific damage if it does exist. As far as I can tell, they go to a roads maintenance fund, which we'll use on an annual basis in other parts of the city. In order really to account for a damage, it would seem to me that those monies paid would be earmarked and specified for that particular roadway and its future replacement. These are not. And again, like I think with PSC, we feel this exceeds what is required in our franchise, which is a contract, and it specifically states that we will restore the rights-of-way to as good or better a condition as they were before. And this was adopted recently, just extended again with the restoration standards in place, and was satisfactory to the city. Again, I would argue that those standards do protect the city and its asset. And again, at the end of the day, these rights-of-way preserve or serve for multiple interests, and cuts and things are maybe just a cost of doing business. Thank you.
Thank you. Last person who signed up is Randy Black.
Good evening, Mayor Anderson and City Council of Lakewood. I'm Randy Black, General Manager for Lakewood Water District. I'm also here to talk about the degradation fee that the City Council is now looking at here tonight. I did send a letter to Mr. Cofield and the mayor, as well as the Public Works Engineer Director, Paul Busich. We're very concerned with the degradation fee, as it will impact the cost of doing business within the city of Lakewood that we will have to pass on to our developers, as well as to those folks that are looking to have water service within the roadway, that we'll have to add to the cost, as well as the right-of-way fee. Just an example, a 10 by 10 patch in the road will be about a $400 according to the fee at the 80% PCI rating. And that's about $400 added to the permit that we need for the right-of-way, which is about $500. So it adds $900 right up front. The other concern that we have is that we do about 3 miles a year plus of replacing an upgrade of our water systems. And most cases, we are in the roadway. And again, using just the 80% PCI evaluation, that's going to translate to about $200,000 more for our district to pay for the cost of those replacement of those water mains going forward. And that will, in turn, add about another 10 to 15 years longer it's going to take us to replace those water mains, which we have a 50-year program that we're currently in. So we feel that we've had some great conversation with the city. I want to thank Paul Busich and Mr. Cofield for their time and effort on discussing this. I really applaud the opportunity to get together to discuss this. I think there are some great ideas that can be garnered going forward, that we can look at some alternatives. I just don't think that the costs that we're looking at here fit the penalties that'll come forward on the fact that we are here and we're going to guarantee our work going forward. So thank you for your time.
That's all the people who've signed up, but if there's anyone else who wishes to speak at public comment, please step forward. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak at public comment? Hearing none, I declare public comment closed. We now move to the consent agenda. Madam Clerk.
A, approval of the minutes of the City Council study session of September 24th, 2018. B, approval of the minutes of the City Council meeting of October 1, 2018. C, motion number 2018-60, setting November 5th, 2018 at approximately 7 p.m. as the date for a public hearing on the proposed 2019 to 2020 biennial budget and 2019 property tax levy. D, motion number 2018-61, setting November 5th, 2018 at approximately 7 p.m. as the date for a public hearing on the proposed 2018 budget amendments. E, motion number 2018-62, approving a memorandum of understanding with Washington State Department of Transportation relative to the economic growth and revitalization of Pacific Highway. F, motion number 2018-63, authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement in the amount of $23,395 with the town of Steilacoom through December 31st, 2021 for animal control services. G, motion number 2018-64, authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with the city of DuPont in the amount of $33,252 through December 31st, 2021 for animal control services. H, motion number 2018-65, authorizing the execution of a contract with Axum General Construction, Inc. in the amount of $522,944.76 for the Gravely Lake Drive Safe Routes to School Bridgeport to Steilacoom project. I, motion number 2018-66, authorizing the execution of a contract with Northeast Electrical LLC in the amount of $242,250 for the 2018 citywide electrical repair project. J, motion number 2018-67, authorizing the execution of a contract with Iverson and Sons Incorporated in the amount of $81,850 for the 2018 drainage repair project. K, motion number 2018-68, appointing Earl Borgert and Patty Bell to serve on the Lakewood Arts Commission through October 15th, 2020, and reappointing Philip Rashke to serve on the Lakewood Arts Commission through October 15th, 2021. L, motion number 2018-69, appointing Ron Banner to serve as the Clover Park School District representative on the Lakewoods Promise Advisory Board. M, items filed in the office of the city clerk. 1, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting minutes of May 22nd, 2018. 2, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting minutes of July 24th, 2018. 3, Lakewood Arts Commission meeting minutes of August 6th, 2018. 4, Public Safety Advisory Committee meeting minutes of September 5th, 2018. 5, Lakewoods Promise Advisory Board meeting minutes of September 6th, 2018.
Thank you. Is there any item which any member of the council wishes to have removed from the consent agenda? Mr. Whalen.
Mr. Mayor, I ask that we remove item I from the consent agenda.
Are there any others? Well, then I entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda absent item I.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Been moved by Mr. Simpson, seconded by Ms. Barth, that we adopt the consent agenda, less item I. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We move to matter I. Mr. City Manager, I had received a request from staff to have that removed. Is there a request just for separate consideration of that, or is it not timely?
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, our recommendation is that you not take action on that item this evening. We apparently have a concern with the lowest and most responsive bidder in regards to their ability to deliver the services as they bid on. So we've got a little bit of more research to do on that. We expect to be back in front of you with either this bidder or somebody else at your next regular meeting.
Right, so, Madam Parliamentarian, do we just take no action, or do we need to continue it to a date certain?
If you've removed it from the consent agenda, then it should be fine to be removed from the agenda. That should not be a problem.
Okay, then we'll move forward.
Regular agenda.
So when we move to the regular agenda, first item of business under resolutions is resolution number 2018-14, Madam Clerk.
Resolution number 2018-14, supporting the establishment and implementation of a pavement degradation fee based on pavement condition, road classification, and road type.
For this, we have Ms. Kelly Fong.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members.
Before you is Resolution 2018-14, which supports the development and implementation of a pavement degradation fee. The pavement degradation fee was most recently reviewed at the City Council study session on October 7th, 2018. As discussed then, the fee would be added to the city's engineering standards manual. The intent of the fee is to recover loss in pavement serviceability and to improve the city's capacity to handle future repair and/or reconstruction costs of the streets. The fee is consistent with the terms of the existing utility franchises as outlined in the resolutions. The fee presented in 2018-14 would be assessed to all roadways with a pavement condition score of 50 and above. Any roadways with a PCI of 49 or below would be exempt from the fee. Other exemptions from the pavement degradation fee would also include cuts in roadways that are fully budgeted within the next biennium without contingent funds needed for a grind and overlay or complete rebuild, cuts determined to be in the best interest of the city and adopted by City Council motion, and longitudinal cuts that replace existing seams as part of the lane width reconstruction process. With that, I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions you might have on Resolution 2018-14.
Questions for Ms. Kelly Hong? Mr. Whalen?
Well, thank you. I do have a couple of questions in light of the public comment we received tonight and the letters we've received. So the first question, in light of the fact that we've had franchise agreements over the course of Lakewood's history, where did this concept come from and why now? I understand kind of where it came from with the intent to preserve the city's streets and to ensure that we've got proper attention paid to the investment we make in infrastructure, but why now, given the fact that we've already done franchise agreements that didn't include this kind of concept?
So recently, a lot of municipalities have been doing pavement studies, a lot of them coming particularly within the last 10 years, and there's been a movement towards pavement degradation fees at the municipal level.
Okay, and the provision in the packet, I'm looking at page 76 of the proposed ordinance that discusses, or the proposed resolution, that the pavement degradation fee is consistent with the terms of existing utility franchises. And my question to you, based on the comment I heard, which I don't have in front of me, is, for example, the section of the franchise fee, for example, with PSE's franchise, it discusses the responsibility contractually to repair the streets. Why would that not be a sufficient measure of reconstruction of damage to the right-of-way, the street?
So one of the consistent findings of these studies is that pavement patches, no matter how well their repair, never restore the pavement conditions to the conditions that existed prior to them being cut.
Okay. So the history has shown that pavement patches, even consistent with the franchise fee requirements, aren't sufficient to substantiate the structural integrity of the roads.
That is correct.
And tell us how the franchise fee is going to be bucketed, if you will, with other, not franchise fee, the PDF fee bucketed with others to ensure that we maintain the structural integrity after that kind of damage occurs. So how does that work? So we have this bucket of funds that people pay into with the PDF fees. We have an intermittent cut by a franchisor, franchisee rather, and they've done their patch. At what point do we make the election to utilize some bucket of PDF fees to further the structural integrity with greater work than what a patch might have required?
Yeah, so typically cities will put it in their general fund for street maintenance rather than attribute it to a particular road segment. And that is the intent of the city.
So help me along here. So if the franchisee, consistent with the franchise agreement, makes a cut for a development, or the developer makes the cut, and they're servicing that development, so they make a cut in the right-of-way, I presume, and it gets patched, do we do anything then with the PDF? Because if they're complying with the terms of the franchise, they've made their requisite repair. But what do we do with regard to further quote-unquote repair that enhances the structural integrity of the roadway that would be consistent with what we're trying to achieve here?
So what I'm hearing, just to clarify, is you're asking, are those funds applied to that particular roadway for their structural repair?
Well, logistically, what happens? So they do their cut, and consistent with the franchise agreement, they make their repair. Do we make them do anything further at that time, or they just pay in the fee for us to, at some point in the future, when we deem it appropriate, to do further repair?
The only thing after that point would be the 1-year warranty that would be assessed on the pavement patch itself.
But that's already in the franchise agreement, isn't it?
Correct. Actually, I take that back. The pavement patch warranty, excuse me, is in the City of Lakewood Engineer Standards Manual.
Manual, okay. Which is already, so any repairs they would make consistent with the terms of the franchise agreement would have to comply with the Engineering Standards Manual anyway.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, that's it.
so and I have the master control.
I'll turn mine off.
The franchise agreements refer to, is it the franchise agreement or the engineering standard that currently says they will repair it to as good or better standard?
The franchise agreement says good or is better.
And the studies say that no matter how good the patch, there's structural damage that can't be repaired by a patch.
Correct, and the City Engineer Manual also.
So logically following from that, you could argue that to comply with the franchise agreement, they'd have to repave, put a whole lane in to make it as good or better than it was before a cut. And so from this, we take some funds because you can't repair that without repaving. It's economic waste to apply it to that roadway, and you use it to raise the pavement standards throughout the city.
Correct.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am trying to clarify that same provision in the franchise agreements. And when it was presented to the council, it was presented as you described, that patching of any sort can restore a roadway to the PCI that existed prior to the patch, but that the long-term impact of the patch is that the structure of the road will degrade more quickly than if it had not been patched. Even so, if it's at 80 and it's restored to 80, it'll fall to 70 in a shorter period of time in any event. And is that the logic that's in play here?
Patching of the road will affect the pavement condition index score of a roadway, but the latter part, yes.
Okay. It was about, I guess, the patching of a roadway conceivably could affect the pavement index either up or down. I mean, someone might patch something to the point of where the pavement index is better than it was before, particularly if it was a roadway that had a really low pavement index. Is that not possible as a result of someone patching, particularly someone doing an entire lane?
So the patching itself, but the area of influence is affected and has been structurally undermined by the pavement cut.
Okay, so it seems that our position as a city is changing from we want someone who is making a cut in the roadway to repair it to as good or better. That's what we have in our franchise agreements. And I suppose when we have someone who's making a cut who is not a franchisee, they get a right-of-way permit, is that same wording or provision to repair it to as good or better in the right-of-way permit that's issued to someone who's not a franchisee?
Councilmember Brandstetter, I don't have an answer for that, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay, because it would seem that in order to be consistent, we would want to do that, and while franchisees make more and perhaps larger cuts, there are other reasons why other entities would make cuts in the roadway and be able to go and do that and get right-of-way permits. So I guess we would be looking, since this is intended to apply in both cases, this is not intended to be a degradation fee, a charge just to franchisees, but to anyone who makes a cut. So that would seem to be important to find a language that would be consistent. And if we no longer believe that a roadway can be repaired or after a cut to as good or better, then does that lead to we're going to seek amendments of the existing franchise agreements where that wording is a part of them?
So Councilmember Brandstetter, the Public Works Director just let me know that that language is found in the right-of-way permits as of currently. And going to the second question, it goes back to the pavement degradation fee being consistent with the term, so I don't foresee any amendments to the franchise agreements coming.
So then what standard would we use to determine that a franchisee has repaired a section of road to an as good or better standard and has met the requirements of their franchise agreement if we don't believe that's possible?
The Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I've heard a lot of questions tonight, and I'm not sure what order I'd like to answer them in. But when you're talking about a pavement degradation fee and as good or better, it's a recognition that when someone comes in and they cut the road, they've created now a patch. And the way that we evaluate the condition of the road and therefore the remaining life is the PCI, Pavement Condition Index. Every time you cut the road, the more you cut, the lower the PCI rating gets over time. It's not a perfect measurement, but it is the only measurement that's nationally recognized for condition of the road. So yes, the franchise utilities and others who cut our roads are coming in and they're doing a cut and they're doing a repair of that. But that repair in and of itself cannot bring the life of the road back up to what it was in accordance before they did the cut. And that's what the pavement degradation fee is trying to capture. That loss of asset life that occurs when you impact the asset through a cut and a repair. The other question I heard raised was, well, how are we going to use the funds? And yes, the truth of the matter is they may be used to offset some of our costs on the operational side and repair of road. But think of it another way, is the general fund funds a lot of different activities in the transportation arena. You also allocate funds for grind and overlay and rebuild. So those funds that we take in on this PDF fee on this road here will be applied through the general fund allocation to a complete grind and overlay or rebuild or in some other fashions as the council directs. We would not be able to track every single road cut, PDF fee, and reserve those funds just for that location, for that road, when it needs to be rebuilt in the future. It's an unmanageable task. What is manageable is to say we have this PDF fund that we're going to collect, set aside, and use it for our road projects. Rebuilds, grinds, and overlays, complete rebuilds are contributory costs outside of what we get for grant funding. When that road that has had a cut and has had a collection of a pavement degradation fee, when it comes up for its time, it will receive the same benefit as a different road did, because those funds from different roads will be used to offset our cost for rebuilding that road. You know, it's all for one for all, if you want to think of it that way. It's all the fees that come in are being applied as appropriate by year for the grind overlay complete road rebuild. Were there some other questions that you wanted to ask again?
We'll get to you. All right, there you go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. The beginning of your answer to Councilmember Brandstair's question, you spoke of the loss of the asset life in talking about cuts to the pavement made by anybody. Would you explain to me the difference between that and the cost of doing business?
Cost of doing business.
Yes.
Okay.
The gentleman from PSE made a good point. This is the cost of doing business. No matter how well they fill that cut in, you have still, if I follow your argument, degraded the quality of the road. So how is the loss of that asset life any different than the cost of doing business?
It's an excellent question, and it becomes to a philosophical perspective on that. The cost of doing business can include recognizing that when the loss of asset life occurs, we accept that, and we go and we find funds from general fund and others to replace that. My understanding is that the council asked staff to take a look at what options we have, whether we extend the pavement moratorium from 5 years to 10 years, and what was brought forward was an alternative concept, which is a pavement degradation fee that, as Shanna has indicated, is becoming, it's not widely used, but it's becoming more recognized as a means of recognizing the loss in asset life. Now, if there were no cuts on a roadway, it's going to wear. We know that, we acknowledge that, and we plan for that in our budgeting, if you will, long term. Wear and tear of a roadway, thankfully we don't have frost heave here, but the wear and tear, types of trucks, the classification of the roadway, all those get factored into the design of the structural portions of the road and then anticipated life of it. What we're saying is that because of the way we evaluate roads and we rate them for future work, that the more cuts, even though they're repaired well, the more cuts we have, it takes the life, the asset life, and instead of following a nice curve that you've seen in the past, it drops it, and it continues to drop it down as the PCI rating is done every 2 years. Sooner or later, when we hit a point of like 50, we go from the ability to maintain it to having to come to you and say, we need money to rebuild it. You're welcome.
Mr. Bolke.
Just a few questions, and this is for either one of you. We discussed, or we had some communications about the longitudinal cuts, the very long ones that were half the street, I think. And there was some agreement as to how we would treat that. But that's not in here. Is that in the engineering manual that's either you change or we change at some separate point in time?
The engineering standards are adopted by the Public Works Engineering Director, and I think appropriately so, because every time we need to make a change on a number or something, we would have to come back to you, and you would be very tired of seeing us coming before you with changes. What we have agreed to is that there's the exemption process that the Director, Public Works Engineering Director has, the ability to waive a pavement degradation fee. Specifically where, and this is in conversation with Lakewood Water District, they make a valid point that if they're cutting out or right on the seam when the road was built, then they're basically replacing like for like. For that longitudinal cut, we wouldn't assess a pavement degradation fee. For the transverse ones, remember those are the ones that are coming towards the center from the sides, they would still pay 3 feet on either side the fee, which would be relatively a nominal fee when you think about it long term on a lot of long cuts. So that would be within the engineering standards statements.
So we've discussed different kinds of cuts, and I'm assuming the longitudinal fee for the water guys, because they're replacing at somebody's house or something, and they have to make that cut. And right now, they just pay a fee for the license.
They pay a right-of-way fee.
Okay.
And that's primarily to cover the engineering review and then the inspection services. But it doesn't get to the loss of service life of the roadway.
So that, I'm guessing that would probably be the most common use of this, it would be a newer road
It would be the
where a
most,
cut like that had to be made, and for some reason.
it could happen in any road, depending upon the side service, whether it be the water district or whether it be Pierce County Sewers or Puget Sound Energy on a gas service. Anything that has essentially aged out and failed would need to be replaced, and that's where I would see the longitudinal cuts coming in. We get calls on those for locates on a regular basis. When it comes to the big complete lane restoration, that we're getting a grind and overlay. So recognizing we're getting rid of that weak point, so we're okay. We're not really losing losses of service of road. We're building a new road. It's when someone comes in and they run the entire length and they're doing a 3-foot wide trench. Now we've got a weak zone on both sides. And typically what we see when the road does start to fall apart, that's nice and solid. The rest of it starts coming apart because it's not really hooked together. It's not homogeneous anymore.
Is that still occurring, though, under the new franchise agreements that we have?
Can tell you I've driven through the city on a few roads of late, and yes, I'm still seeing that to some degree. Not all of, just because it's a franchise agreement, doesn't mean that the work they're doing requires a complete rebuild of the road. Depends on the nature of the work and the size of the work they're doing.
So you mentioned that the alternative to this that was discussed was a 10-year lockout, so to speak.
That was brought forward to council, yes.
How many cities or entities do you know do a 10-year? Or what are the options? Everyone seems to do 5. 5 is really the agreed upon minimum, it sounds like. What are the other options that we have?
So typically, the industry standard is 5 years. The only jurisdiction that I know of that is at 10 years is the city of Chicago.
Okay. So, and anything in between? Does anybody do 7?
I believe there was one jurisdiction that was a 7-year. Councilmember Boki, I'll have to get back to you on what jurisdiction that was.
So I guess, not being an engineer, and you've given us information, so I apologize if I don't remember it. It's that PCI rating, right? So we fix a street, and it theoretically on that day is 100.
It's 100.
So let's take that new part of Stillicum Boulevard that you did there because it's a nice compact. It's 100 if you drove down there today.
I think it's 110, but
110.
It's beautiful.
So normal wear and tear, there's quite a bit of traffic there.
Yes.
You would expect after 5 years, it would still be in the 90s if it was redone, if it was done according to modern day engineering standards, and given that there's not a lot of truck traffic,
Correct.
would you
I would
still
expect that.
consider it in the 90s?
I would certainly expect in 5 years on a road that's designed properly, it would still be in the 90s.
Okay, and so then but that's the day the no-cut thing comes off. So how about at 10 years?
Let me just say one thing before we talk about 10 years is the idea that it's a no cut is not absolute.
Right.
Okay, just recognize that. That means that you can't plan your work to cut it in 5 years. You're going to have to wait. But emergencies happen. And when things happen and they have to get in and cut the road, they're going to cut the road. We have to accommodate that. Historically, the engineering standards applied a fee for doing that. It was a nominal fee, honestly. It was a fixed cost. It really wasn't much. The biggest incentive was the repavement, where how much you had to repave when you go and you cut the road. So now we're talking about 10 years. So I've talked to a couple of folks in the utilities business, and they did not find 10-year moratorium very favorable at all, primarily because they can't necessarily plan out their work for 10 years. In some cases, they're lucky if they've got and plan for a 6-year work program. To go 10 years, well, in 2 more years, they've added another 2 years, and another 2 years after they've added 2 more years. That means that for at least 4 years outside of what they've already planned, they can't go in and touch their asset, their inventory. A lot of utilities, they don't do just-in-time delivery for their asset replacement. They get close. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to plan for your asset to last 3 years and replace it in the third year, knowing fully well that you got about a 25 to 50% margin that's going to fail within 18 months of that either side. So you want to get in early. At the same time, you don't want to go in and replace something in the next 3 years if your best estimate is that it's got 8 more years of life in it, because you're throwing away value. And a well-run utility is not going to do that. They're going to take it to the point where their cost and consequence and their risk is balanced by their losses if it happens.
So that's why they don't like the 10-year. And that's why nobody does a 10-year.
Yeah.
Okay. So the proposal in front of us at 14, I guess there's 2 proposals in front of us tonight, sets them anything below 50, this doesn't, they're actually doing us a favor, really, right? I mean,
At 50, the road is degraded to the point where we're planning to replace it anyhow, even though it may not be in the current 2-year budget. We've already been tracking this. We got a really good idea we're going to be replacing it soon. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to collect a fee. Now, some jurisdictions do. They take it right down to 0. But we're saying is that 50 seems like a good measure to stop collecting a pavement degradation fee in anticipation that we're going to be coming in and tearing through it.
would that be, would 50 or below include almost a majority of our residential streets?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, and I really appreciate it, because one of the things I asked my staff to do was, the last couple of days, tell me how many road segments we have and where they are. So here in the city of Lakewood, we actually measure 1,532 road segments. There are 45 that are below 50. We have 173 that are between 50 and 70. So I know one of the considerations council is mulling over is whether to make the threshold 50 or 70. I just wanted to let you know at the threshold of 50, there's only 45 road segments that would not have to pay a pavement degradation fee. But between 50 and 70, there's 175, which is a little over 11% of our roadways, that we would be losing the ability to collect damages on, if you will, as well as if you think about a little bit, since PCI is about the condition of the road surface, which is directly related to how many cuts you have in the road. When you're at that knee point, you're going down between 70 and 50, the more cuts you have, the faster it's going to hit that 50 threshold. The sooner we're likely, based on the indications of PCI, want to go out there and rebuild the road. It's just something for you to consider. Want to make sure you have that information when you're thinking about the 50 and 70 thresholds.
Of the road segments you mentioned, with kind of the staff review of the different segments that are 50 and under and 50 to 70, have you had a chance to sit down with folks, say at Lakewood Water, and discuss their plans over the next 5 to 10 years as to how they might impact those segments that we've identified with PCI ratings, either 50 and below or 50 to 70?
I don't believe that level of coordination has occurred, but I would like to see it happen.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that up is because we're all here trying to serve the public interest, all of us. You guys have done a fantastic job on the staff level with the work you've done on this and the reports. But I certainly hear what the folks are saying out there, because we don't want to whack the public on one hand and see them face increases on the other when we're all trying to do the right thing by all of our residents, right? So I would hope that we would really have a chance to look at the Venn diagram of needs and plans to avoid the unintended consequences of problems for the public. You know, all the while recognizing that when we put a bunch of money into these roads, as we've done a beautiful job of that over the last 4 to 5 years, thanks much to your staff. But that fine new work is already subject to the moratorium.
Right. It was an interesting outcome of this process is we've had utility providers coming to us asking for sit-downs to talk about their coordinated plans for the next 5 to 10 years. Whereas in the past, in some cases, not the representatives here tonight, thankfully, but other utilities have not even come to our quarterly meetings on utility coordination. And
so there's been good value there for sure.
it has, and it would definitely be a benefit to them as well as us. They understand what our our 6-year plan is. We understand what their 6-year plan is. So they know that if they have a project on the cusp, whether it's 7 years or 6 years or 5 years, plan on doing it in the 5th year, because that's when we're going to be in there, barring any changes, so that they can plan for it properly, especially since most of the projects are expensive projects.
If you had your druthers, from your professional expertise and years of experience, would you gravitate more toward a recommendation on 14 or 15?
I think it is council's prerogative, but I do like the 50 threshold because I feel like there's letting go of 11% of our roads and seeing them degrade further with cuts and not getting any realization from those cuts. It's a little bothersome.
And that's ordinance 14.
I don't have the one in front of me, but I believe you're correct. Ordinance 14 is the PCI of 50.
Correct, yeah. Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on the segments, am I, by my math here, is it about 1/10 of a mile? Is that what you consider a segment?
Well, it's interesting. The segments are actually between intersections.
Oh, okay.
So I brought along with
Okay.
me, you know the project, Rabbit Lake Drive project, we're proposing from Nyanza to Washington Boulevard?
Yes.
Right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 segments. One's 1,140 feet. The shortest is 296 feet.
Oh.
The PCIs range from as low as 49 on 1,140 to as high as 73 on the 296-foot length. And then I've got more examples, which I won't bore you with, but basically the segment lengths, I can't tell you it's how many miles it is. I can tell you is I've got this many segment lengths. I can go back and do the math and figure them all out because we have those all tabulated. I just don't have it with me tonight.
Well, I did the math, but that didn't work because it wasn't right? Okay, thanks.
Segments are not uniform,
No,
unfortunately.
they're not. Okay, I didn't know that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd entertain a motion on number 2018-60, excuse me, resolution number 2018-14.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Been moved by Mr. Brandstetter, seconded by Mr. Bulkey, that we adopt resolution 2018-14. Further discussion. Mr. Brandstetter.
Yep. Mr. Mayor, I'm confident from the presentations that we received that we can do this. That's not the same as that we should. I'm also somewhat divided on the resolution because in one regard, I am not sure that we ought to move in this direction away from what we've been doing. We have been doing well in terms of our history of improving the streets in the city, both literally and comparatively with neighboring jurisdictions. With one exception, and I'm not even sure if that's an exception, there hasn't been a single project that we've done over the years, in the past 9 and in my recollection prior to that, that the need to go and do a particular road at this time, that the cause of needing action on it was it degraded faster than it should have because of pavement patching. More often we need to do it because it's well beyond the time when it should have been prepared because the county or very early in city, we just never got around to doing it. You know, we're dealing with Stellacum Boulevard now and in the next couple of bienniums. That the history that we have on that is that it was last done years ago. Time-wise, it's well past what the expected life of it should be. But the issue hasn't been patching on Stellacum Boulevard has caused this to happen. There is one of the worst, and I imagine some of the worst segments in the city are on Veterans, which is a project that we have a time on it. That's a roadway that goes back to the time of when they weren't doing overlays, they were doing concrete. It's going off over there. And yet the reason that we're doing that, you know, the patching isn't the justification. So while science may say there are some degradations that are due to patching, that hasn't been our history of where we've gone forward to do that, nor was it the history of the county before us. So I'm not quite sure that moving in terms of this fee is appropriate. But on the flip side, if we decide to do it, I'm concerned that the proposal that we have is not structured correctly and doesn't have all of the elements of it to do that. And that's in two ways that I would want to change the proposal if we were going to move forward to it. And I'll propose an amendment to the resolution in this regard, but there are two things. First of all, the agenda today has two identical resolutions with the only difference being 50 or 70. And I think we should just deal with it with this resolution, and if we want 70, we should amend it to it. And I would argue that we should use 70 as a standard. And the reason primarily of why I think that's the case is we were just at a budget session, and we looked at the performance standards proposed by the Public Works Engineering Department. And the performance standard for the PCI on our roads was 70, that we should be operating as a city and providing municipal services to keep all roads at a minimum of 70. Now, we have 10% of our segments that aren't there, but those seem to be then segments that we definitely ought to be focused on doing something about them, and that we should not be so significantly worried about them degrading further. We should be worried about getting to them soonest. And so I would, you know, one of the elements of that I would amend this to is to adopt the the resolution 15 standards and just amend 14 to say 70 where it does that in section 3. The other thing is that our maintenance of PCI in roads, our strategy, we really have 4 strategies. Okay? We construct new roads, we reconstruct roads, we do overlays, and we do chip seal applications. And I understand from the engineer that chip seal is a less of a structural activity than the other 3. But in the minds of our citizens, of our residents, you chip seal their road, and they like the quality of the chip seals since we've 3 years ago restarted this program, 4 years ago restarted this program. They would not want to have us chip seal a road and then not have a moratorium on it that allows it to be cut immediately, being able to go and do that, because they see that newly chip-sealed road as a part of their attractive neighborhood. They see it as an indication that we're providing them good municipal services. And, you know, thus I would look to see that a moratorium would be applied to chip-sealed roads in the same way that it is to the other three maintenance strategies that we have. I did ask the city manager to help me with this because I was concerned about the relationship between this resolution and the engineering standards manual. So, and I think that you all have a copy of the amendment to this resolution that I would like to propose. Essentially, I am proposing to amend Section 3 to enumerate 4 specific exemption criteria that is not included in the draft of the regulation. To add a Section 4, which is really moving the last 2 sentences of the original Section 3 to a section by themselves, since they don't particularly relate to exception criteria. And then adding a Section 5 that specifically indicates that the 5-year street cut moratorium be applied to all 4 of the maintenance reconstruction strategies that we have, specifically to include chip seal, overlay, reconstruction, and new construction. And I would move adoption of that group of amendments.
So Mr. Brandstetter has moved to amend resolution number 2018-14 to include amendments to Section 3 regarding enumeration of conditions of exemption and adding a Section 5 regarding chip seal moratorium. Is there a second to the amendment? Is there a second to the amendment?
Mr. Mayor, I'll second that, but I do have some questions.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Brandstetter, would you wish to speak to your amendment? You already have.
I already have, but I'd be glad to entertain a question to clarify my comments.
Mr. Bolke.
So my questions are, in Section 3, and there's all these additional things. If the city failed to give 6 months, and okay, so with a pavement condition index score of 70 or higher, so it meets the criteria of 2018-15, unless said pavement cuts meet the following exemption criteria, and if the city failed to give 6 months notice of an upcoming roadway rehabilitation project, either because of a change in property ownership, which I'm not quite understanding, or a change in the city's capital facilities plan, which I think I understand, if the pavement index of the roadway is to be cut is 69 or less, which we state on the line above. If the city engineer determines that the roadway to be cut is fully budgeted within the next biennium. So what is the purpose of these other items? And then you're including chip seal, and then I need to understand why chip sealing wasn't included first of all.
Okay.
And I'll ask the city manager.
I would tell you is that the original resolution didn't include any enumeration of exceptions. They were somewhat implied to be in the manual. That so when I asked for assistance in drafting this, that if there were going to be some specific citation of exemptions, that the actuality is that the exceptions 2 and 3 were the ones that were of interest to me, in that it was enumerating that we were accepting the performance standard of 70 as a city responsibility, and that and then that adding chip seal within section 3. I think that without this amendment, that the 1 and 4 were already implied in the manual. They're certainly not my intent to present those as a change to anything. It's merely enumerating them here in the resolution rather than not having any exceptions enumerated at all in the resolution.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Mr. Whalen.
Also just a procedural point. It's difficult for me to kind of glean the fine points of this kind of on the fly. And some of these issues that have good and better public comment, it seems to me it would be helpful to have it during a study session. So sometimes I find these policy discussions in a vacuum, and we don't have this kind of input, to be challenging to then make a week later on the fly, especially with an amendment that may have some unintended consequences. I don't know if including chip seal makes sense, because as I understand it, a chip seal application, while aesthetically great and it certainly saves the surface, it's not a structural application per se, and therefore it makes it more problematic to include that under the policy of what we're trying to do with the PDF, which is really to enhance the structural integrity of the road, notwithstanding the repair that is required by a franchise agreement, as we heard tonight, Section 6 of the PSE franchise agreement. I am more convinced after listening to this that the PDF is described in either ordinance, draft ordinance 14 or 15, is likely consistent with the franchise agreements, because it recognizes that the PDF is really an over and above repair policy, as opposed to getting them to a structural repair. That's really what the PDF is designed to accommodate. So I guess in sum, I would prefer to chew on this at a further study session, but I'm not inclined to support the amendment if it includes chip seal.
Mr. Bolke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess I need to ask the Public Works Director, so how many of these things, so number one, why wasn't chip seal already included? Or what is the standard, and then of item Roman numeral I to Roman numeral 1 through 4, what is already included in the engineering manual?
So to answer your first question, we did not propose to include chip sealing in the moratorium, because as has been discussed, chip sealing is basically a surface feature, and it does not address the structural integrity of the roadway. So we did not feel it was appropriate to apply a moratorium to that, but we do recognize that from the public's perspective, when they see a good chip seal down, they've got to ask themselves, why are you allowing a cut into it? But that's an answer we have readily at hand should they call in and talk to us about that. As far as the other items, let's see if I can find the right Can you bring those up, please, Brianna?
Is it in there? No, he doesn't have it.
Thank you. So under section 3, as it sits right here, thank you, I've got 2 copies here. Let's see if I can figure out which one I'm going to deal with right now. Essentially, I if the city failed to give 6 months' notice of an upcoming roadway rehabilitation project, either because of, and there's a list of a couple different items. So what this is acknowledging the fact is we have an obligation to coordinate with our utility partners also. And if we don't give them advance notice, then they have grounds to argue that we didn't tell them, so they shouldn't be obstructed from cutting on, in the roadway. So that's why those quarterly meetings are so important. So we give the coordination, we give the information, we invite them to talk to them about it. That's actually a part of the engineering standards right now.
Okay.
So if the pavement index score of the road, we'd cut a 69 or less, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And the one that I'm looking at here, it was using 70 as a threshold. So it's basically saying if your PCI on the roadway is below 70, then you don't have to pay the pavement degradation fee. If we determine that it is fully budgeted within the next biennium, this gets back to is if we already have a project planned and it's fully budgeted and therefore we're assured we're going to do it, we're not going to charge someone a pavement degradation fee.
How do you have that ability though now?
How do we have that know-how?
I mean, if we pass this ordinance, then how do you have that ability to do that?
Every 2 years, you assign us a budget for projects.
Okay.
And if you, through the council and our recommendation, if don't agree, or if we don't have a project in the next 2 years, I have no certainty of when that project is actually going to occur. Even though we have a proposed spending plan, and you're agreeing to that, I have to acknowledge the fact and recognize that things can happen, priorities can change, budgets may need to shift. I do know that in the next 2 years, when you pass the next budget, I've got a plan of action for the next all the roads we're going to work on. So those roads, I'm not going to charge a pavement degradation fee. I already have all the funding allocated for that.
But you have that ability by what means?
Council authorization. By stating it through here, saying is that when you have.
But if we didn't pass this.
It'll be in the engineering standards.
It's in the engineering standards.
It will be in the engineering standards.
Okay.
And when the fee structure comes to you, the fee structure in November, if you approve a pavement degradation fee, it'll have how the fees are assessed in that ordinance.
Okay, and I don't even want to talk about 4. Because that means we'd be lobbied over every street. Okay, good. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make my comments both on the amendment and on the underlying ordinance, resolution, excuse me. First of all, I overly simplified, state where you are and then state why and then state where you are again. And where I am is I'm against the amendment and for the ordinance. First, with respect to the amendment, I agree that chip seal would be an inappropriate addition. I think there's also the greater ability to legally challenge that because it's not addressing structural integrity as opposed to a surface seal preservation / cosmetic application. Secondly, I am in favor, for the reasons stated by the Public Works Director, of 50 versus 70 being the standard. And thirdly, for over 30 years practicing law, I would tell clients, I don't know how many occasions, tell me where you want to be when this is over. Don't tell me how to get there. I'll figure out how to get there. I'm not a roadway engineer. And I don't think it's appropriate for the council to get too far down in the weeds on technical engineering standards as opposed to giving guidance and policy and then approving the fees that come out of that. So that's my take on the amendment. Now, with respect to the underlying ordinance, a long time ago I blew my knee out. So I had one good knee, one bad knee. And I got cut. And it got grafted, and it felt a lot better. And I could teach kids how to run hurdles. I could ski. It didn't make noise when I walked. But as I got older, I still had one good knee and one bad knee because that graft wasn't as good as the original. It got looser faster, makes noise, hurts. And I think the same thing when you cut pavement. And so I'm convinced that a cut properly patched isn't equivalent to intact pavement. And I've seen that in my own neighborhood with private roads, long longitudinal cuts, which 10 years later are uneven. And in some cases, the seals open to the elements. Secondly, if we were a full-service city, and which people don't recognize we aren't, we would have control over our utilities, and the efforts to maximize road integrity would be fully coordinated with utilities, and the cost would be shared by the utility ratepayers and the general fund and the road fund in a manner that would allocate the degradation due to the utility effort, activities to the utility ratepayers as opposed to the general fund and other funds. We don't have that direct ability, and this provides not only the ability to help us maintain overall payment quality, but it is a powerful incentive, which obviously is, I guess, already working to coordinate and continue to coordinate utility efforts with the city's efforts to bring the roads up to city standards. And so for that reason, I'm against the amendment and for the motion underlying resolution. Any other questions, comments before we vote on the amendment? First, we're voting on Mr. Branstadter's amendment to resolution number 2018-14. Will in favor please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion, will those opposed please indicate by saying nay.
Nay.
Nays have it. Now we move to the motion, resolution as originally drafted. Is there any further discussion? All in favor please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Branstetter? Nay. Councilmember Moss? Aye. Councilmember Simpson?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Wellen?
Aye.
Councilmember Barth?
Aye.
Councilmember Boki? Mayor Anderson?
Aye. Motion carries 5-2. Resolution passes 5-2. We now, guys, we don't have a need to address resolution number 2018-15. Move to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business to come before the council?
There's none, Mayor.
New business. Is there new business to come before the council?
No, Mayor.
Then we move to reports by the city manager, a review of the 2018 JBLM Workforce Survey. Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. I'd like to introduce our SSMCP Program Director, Bill Adamson, and Colonel Adamson will be here to give you an update on a recent survey that SSMCP coordinated with JBLM. This is something that they undertake every 2 years, and so we thought it would be beneficial for you to get a snapshot of the results of that survey. So with that, Colonel.
Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council, thanks for the opportunity to give you this presentation. Got a number of slides, actually 2 areas here, the JBLM survey and a quick update on the economic impact adjustment, if you saw that in your packet. This is the 4th survey that SSMCP has done on the JBLM workforce. The previous ones were in 2011, 13, 16, and 18. In 11 and 13, they were focused exclusively on active duty service members. In 16 and 18, we included the DoD civilians. The belief with 15,000 DoD civilians employed at JBLM, and they tend to live here much longer than the active duty, we thought we'd get good information out of them. Here's the demographics on the first slide for this year's survey. Respondent rate is lower than in previous surveys. We believe this is because the younger generation is not accessing and using email the way they used to. And we may need to make adjustments to how we deliver the survey in the future. We've always done this in the past by having the chief of staff at JBLM issue an email to everybody on JBLM that has a .mil extension in their email address, and then we get the input that way. With the inclusion of the DoD civilians, you see a higher percentage of them responding to the survey than active duty. And I point out that the smallest age group, which is our lower enlisted age group, is also the lowest response rate at 6.5%. You can also notice on here that 2 to 10 years is the highest percentage. This is indicative of the large DoD civilian workforce. So, quick summary slide. What are the major areas of improvement needed? This is a trend over 4 different surveys. Traffic congestion is number 1. Quality of education is number 2. And number 3 is somewhat new, not funding of veterans support programs, but eliminate drug and opioid abuse in the past was not even mentioned. Now I think awareness of that issue has increased significantly in the JBLM workforce. Next slide shows ease of commute, housing price, and school quality are the major factors they consider in choosing a place to live. Once again, at the bottom of the slide, this is now including DoD civilians. 60% own and 40% rent their residences. If you look at just active duty, those numbers are reversed. 40% own and 60% rent. Notice that, once again, this is the 3rd year in a row that Lacey has been the #1 location by number of responses in that community. And I'll have a little bit more on Lakewood here in just a second. These green dots represent valid physical addresses that were submitted by the respondents. You can kind of see where they live. They extend well out of Pierce County in some cases. And the survey data on the left side showing how the percentage of respondents is from 2011 to 2018 has been a steady decrease in the city. The city is ranked number 9 out of the 22 jurisdictions that we got responses from. Clover Park School District, once again, for the 4th survey running, is the #1 school district for military kids. Obviously, you all know that's because of the 6 elementary schools on base that are run by Clover Park. Not surprisingly, North Thurston Public School District is #2. That's indicative of the large population down in the Lacey, Olympia area that use the North Thurston School District. Somewhat surprisingly, dissatisfaction with public education is on the rise, jumping nearly 4% since the last survey. Turning to childcare, this is color-coded with on-base responses in white, off-base in sort of the peach color.
Bill, before you go on that, did that distinguish between, the last stat, did you distinguish between DoD civilians and active duty? Because they're different demographics and it changed. Are we comparing apples to apples?
On the schools?
On the satisfaction with schools.
We can break the data out that way, so we have separate civilian and active duty. We don't have it for you tonight.
Yeah, that would be interesting because the DoD civilians living off base are obviously more stable from a time period, and they have more time to get dissatisfied or have a beef with the school as compared to people who rotate in for a couple of years. So
right,
that's
a great point.
Yeah, it's perception versus reality, I guess, or they're comparing it to neighboring schools as opposed to the school they went to in Alabama or whatever.
And in the previous surveys that you've seen, you've always seen around 70 to 72% active duty living off base. When you include the DoD civilians, closer to 87% are living off base. So back to this child care slide. You see the percentage of responses broken out by the hours per day that they use. I want to note that 80% of the survey respondents don't even use child care. So this table is just for those 20% that do. Which probably leads you to the next question. What do they spend for child care? And that's what this next slide shows. 2/3 are spending over $500 a month. Some are paying closer to a mortgage payment at $1,500 to $2,000 a month. And we don't have it broken out by number of children per family. We didn't ask that question, so it could be larger families for that amount of money. But it is a significant chunk of change out of somebody's wage every month. On social services, once again, about 80% of the respondents don't even use social services. So these numbers are somewhat skewed, but behavioral health counseling, once again, is the #1 concern, although it is down from our previous survey in 2016, when it was 15%, it's now 11.6. I believe that drop-off is because there's fewer deployment cycles now. The deployments are fewer, farther between, and less soldiers and airmen are deploying now. But that's sort of anecdotal. It's not from this survey. On retail shopping, we had 8 different categories to look at. Convenience is the #1 concern. A lot of the narrative comments that come along with this particular one highlight that internet shopping is becoming more and more attractive, and so it's harder to really track on and off base shopping.
Bill, on that, were you able to determine on that location, either North Thurston Retail, Lakewood Retail, Tacoma Mall Retail?
No, sir, we were not.
That might be helpful in the next one.
This next slide shows traffic and gate access to JBLM, and this was not part of the survey. We made a decision this year to limit the number of questions. We dropped from 46 questions to about 20 questions this year, and we went with data directly from JBLM authoritative sources. So this is how they measure inbound traffic every day through the Department of Emergency Services. So you can really kind of double these numbers. If you figure they come on base, they have to leave base. And the reason the main gate is so high, as you know, JBLM is bisected by I-5, and when you're on main post, you actually have to leave main post, drive under the freeway, over the on-grade crossing, and then back onto North Fort Lewis. So every time they're going to lunch or going to the Stone Ed Center or whatever it is, it's multiple trips back and forth. Madigan, once again, is near the top other than that. And I should note that at the bottom of the slide, they're closing the McCord North Gate permanently right now because it's just not traffic that much. So that's the one that's right off of 112th by the North Clear Zone, or in the North Clear Zone. And last slide for the survey on transitioning service members. And once again, this data is straight from JBLM Transitioning Services. Still about 50%, although last survey in 2016, we had 59% choosing to stay in the area, but around 50%, once they transition out, stay in this area. Main reason, the economic factor. #2, the quality of life. And about 80% of the service members directly enter the workforce. They're able to find good jobs around here, and 20% pursue a higher degree or technical training. So with that, that's kind of the end of my executive summary on the survey. I have a few slides on the economic analysis report. If you have anything on the survey, I'd be glad to answer. Okay, we'll go on to this next subject. So you'll recall if you were at the last elected officials council that SSMC put on, we talked a bit about this analysis. It's now complete, and so what we're going to be able to do for those that attend the EOC is show you the results of the survey. This was a collaborative effort between UW-Tacoma Center for Business Analytics, JBLM, and SSMCP. JBLM gave me access to DoD authoritative sources that I could then feed to 2 professors and 4 grad students who were doing this work in order to graduate with a Master of Science in Business Data Analytics. It was a pretty good deal that the chair of the program set that up for us because it was at essentially no cost. We did spend some money, though, on software, and we are hiring a student to work on our Phase 2 project here, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. So just to refresh your memory, here's our problem statement. This had never been done before. Determine the economic impact of the JBLM workforce on the South Sound. South Sound defined as Pierce, Thurston County, and the Nisqually tribal lands. I say it's never been done before. The previous studies done by the state were always focused on defense contracting and not on how payroll is spent in the region. So here's the chart that's in our academic report that kind of lays this out. We got broad areas to capture in blue across the top. The direct impacts, these are actual costs taken right from JBLM authoritative sources. The operating budget of the base, $684 million. Of Madigan Hospital, about $600 million. JBLM personnel, $4.9 billion. I'll comment on that in a second. And defense contracts for cities associated with Pierce and Thurston County only, $660 million for a total of $6.8 billion. Then you've got indirect and induced values where we use something called Minnesota in-plan economic multipliers. Point of contact economic development from Pierce County. Thurston County EDC developed specific ones for Thurston and Pierce County. We combined them so we could have a conglomerate to use as we went through this analysis. So in the bottom yellow, at the bottom corner, you see $8.3 billion. And on this next chart, you see a range of $8.3 to $9.2 billion. And I would like to explain why there's a range. JBLM payroll on this slide in the center blue box is $4.9 billion. That excludes 32,000 military retirees that live in this region that use JBLM services. So if you add those folks in, and I think it's appropriate that you do, because many of us, like me, have chosen to live here because of services available on JBLM at Madigan Hospital, the PX, the commissary, and whatnot. So if you include that, that's an additional $800 or so million, bringing the payroll figure up to $5.73 billion, and thereby you have this range, 8.3 to 9.2. And when I gave this presentation about 2 weeks ago to the Tacoma Pierce County EDB Board of Directors, it was not lost on them, the comment in the red blast box there that non-billion dollars should be a regional center, and that was directly comment back to PSRC, who I have written 4 times and appeared before 3 times, and they still don't get it.
So Bill, that also doesn't include any impact on real estate sales and the turnover of property that generates, some people make their living off commissions and escrow fees.
Correct. And we had trouble in data collection for real estate sales. Okay, so we know 60% of the workforce is buying houses. We had another category that we couldn't really complete called banking and finance. And the problem is, yeah, they buy houses in the area, but then the mortgages get sold to lending institutions outside of the region, so we can't really count it as part of our numbers. I mean, it could be serviced by somebody in Minnesota or New York, although the home is originally bought here. We didn't have a good data field to draw on, and maybe next time we can get that so we can get a better figure. But it won't increase that 8.3 to 9.2 billion. It'll just show how payroll is spent better. Another category we threw out was transportation, because we didn't have a good way with the time we had available to break out federal contributions to state contributions on these big highway projects like the JBLM Congestion Relief Project that's just starting. So that's the presentation, and for those of you that attend to EOC, this will sound somewhat repetitive to you in about 3 weeks, but there you go.
Questions for Mr. Adamson?
Just a comment, if I may.
Mr. Whalen.
The white paper that came with this, that I had for a copy that Ms. Newton provided folks at the Purchasers Forum, really goes into great depth. And so if anyone wants, if they haven't received a copy of that, it's actually pretty helpful information.
It is. We've chosen not to kind of like publish that. We don't even post it on our website. We have like a brochure on there. But for folks that ask, we'll give it to them.
Might be helpful for the council to get a copy of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of updates and then perhaps just check in on your calendar. If you recall, last week I provided you an update on the work that the Ruckel House Center is undertaking as a directive from the Washington State Legislature to essentially take a look at the Growth Management Act, what's working, what's not working, how we headed as a state, where are we headed. And so they've been making the rounds throughout Washington State dating back to January of this year. They're going to be holding 2 stakeholder meetings in Pierce County, focused specifically on Pierce County. They're going county by county in late October and early November. So there is a half-day forum on October 29th, and that's from 12:30 to 4:30. That is for staff only. Staff only have been invited to that. And then there is a second one on November 8th. I know Councilmember Branstetter has already RSVP'd to this, from 5:30 to 8, which is for elected officials only. We're not quite sure why they're bifurcating that with just staff and elected officials, but also what's a little interesting is because the questions that are being proposed are different to each group. So it's just a little interesting. So what we are doing is we're doing 2 things. One is that we are in the process of preparing, responses and/or talking points to each of the questions for both of those meetings, so that whoever attends, for example, we're going to be sending a team of staff to the staff meeting, or the staff meeting on October 29th. So we've got at least 4 people going. And so they'll be essentially prepared to be proactive in addressing those questions in terms of how it impacts Lakewood. And then likewise, we are working on talking points for all of you. In addition, it is likely I will be sending at least 1 or 2 staff members to accompany each and every one of you who attends on November 8th as well, so that you'll have a resource there so you don't get caught off guard. If you can imagine, we have people that live and breathe this every day, and there are some interesting nuances to this. So we want to be prepared. We want to ensure that Lakewood is prepared. So look for that here in the next week or 2. Secondly, if you attended the 12th annual Truck and Tractor Day on Saturday, the great weather brought out the crowds. It was over 7,000 people is the count that we have who attended. If you want to get an understanding of how the event went, our communications manager posted a number of pictures earlier this morning on our Facebook page. The Parks and Rec Department did a wonderful job. Specifically, I'd like to recognize our Recreation Coordinator, Sally Martinez, and her team. They did a phenomenal job pulling this together, and just fun by all. And I know several of you were out there, and again, very well attended, and folks had just a wonderful, wonderful time. Next up is, for the community, is going to be our Christmas tree lighting and parade of lights, and 5K run on Saturday, December 8th. So it's kind of the next big community event we have going on. As we look at your calendar, as you look out later, actually beginning next week on the 18th of October, which is this week. On Thursday, the Clover Park School District is going to be hosting an open house on their new middle school over at Alice Mann. This Saturday, beginning at 8:30, will be your legislative retreat here, actually over at the police station, right? Yep, I'm sorry, it'll be over at the police station in the big meeting room there. Also later that afternoon, Habitat for Humanity is having a homeowner dedication for one of the new families. On October 22nd, a week from today, the new middle school groundbreaking ceremony is going to be occurring, and that happens at 4 p.m. And I know Mayor Anderson has been invited to say some words and partake in that as well. Also next Monday, we'll have Meet the Artist reception, Carolyn Burt here at City Hall from 5 to 7. And then next Tuesday, there's 2 events going on. One beginning at 5 p.m., the other at 7. The 5 p.m. event is the 20th anniversary of the Lakewood Historical Society. They're going to be having a big gala event over at the Rotundo over at Clover Park Technical College. And then later on in the evening, beginning at 7 p.m., the North Lakewood Neighborhood Association is going to be holding a community meeting on the adult family home businesses, and we'll be there as a resource to help in any way we can. And then the following week from Thursday, October 25th, from 4:30 to 7, WashDOT is going to be hosting an open house over at Tillicum Elementary School for folks to learn more about the 2 new interchanges that are beginning construction as we speak, as well as the overall larger I-5 JBLM project. And then a week from Saturday on the 27th, a couple of events early in the morning, beginning at 09. Make a Difference Day will kick off with the Pavilion in the Park dedication over at Fort Tillicum Park. And then later that evening from 6 to 10 over at the McGavick Center, EFN will be hosting their annual Abundance Dinner and Auction event. So with that, that's my report, Mayor.
Questions for the city manager, Mr. Simpson? Gotcha.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, John, I was in touch with Leanna Albrecht this afternoon looking for information on the groundbreaking and the open house. And her response to me is, the open house will be on October 22nd in the gym, and then at 4 p.m. There will be a short ceremony, and then folks will head outside for the groundbreaking. And the reason I asked is because the paper I work for asked me to do a story on this, and I wanted, because I got the same information you had, 18 and 22. Then I email her, and I get the email response that I just read to you. So we're probably going to want to clarify that with...
We'll follow up with the school district.
And the reader board at the administration building down the street says 18th and 22nd, as
Yeah.
I drove here tonight, so.
Yeah.
Well, the 18th is an
It's
evening open
open
house,
house.
5:30 to 7.
Yeah.
And then the groundbreaking on the 22nd.
At 4. She is saying the open house, I'm quoting, will be October 2 at Mann Middle School in the gym at 4. There will be a short ceremony, and then folks will head outside for the groundbreaking. We expect the mayor and Colonel Lucas to speak at the groundbreaking. So we've got a crossed
I
line.
think it's a community, my understanding is it's a community open house, because it's
Okay.
an evening
All right.
beforehand. And
All right, that makes sense.
Actually, Marty Schaefer called me while I was out of town, and invited me to speak and said that Colonel Lucas was speaking, and that was the groundbreaking on the 22nd at Mann. So,
I think you're right, Mayor. When I was at the Lake City thing, and they mentioned the 18th being where the neighbors could meet this Corsmo Construction would have representatives there to discuss the project. So maybe is that the difference that we're talking about?
I'll find out.
I'm coming 22nd.
So am I. I'm not going to be there.
I'm just
18th.
going with what the superintendent told me.
Anything else, Mr. Caulfield?
Mayor, thank you.
All right, council comments, Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On last Tuesday, I attended the community health care event that was held at the Marano, honoring Jim Walton for the Humanitarian Award, and it was very well attended. He has a history that is really impressive, very impressive. He's done a lot of things throughout his life, and he's overcome a lot of objectives. And there was over 400 people in attendance, so they were really pleased with the turnout. I did attend the Truck and Tractor Day, and I had a good time too with the kids. And I attended the fundraiser that Harkness Furniture have each year. They have a fundraiser for the scholarships, and that was a lot of fun. And they have a putt-putt contest in the store where they set up different runs. So I attended that and had a good time. So it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Truck and Tractor Day was outstanding. I mentioned I went to the Lake City Community Meeting, about 12, 13 people there, so I thought it was a pretty good turnout. Councilmember Branstetter was there. Youth Council tonight, and they're going to meet with us, I think, next week or November something. And so they're gonna, I don't want to steal their thunder, but we did talk a little bit about bullying, so they are going to bring that up, I believe, when they're here in November and discuss kind of next steps. So just so you're aware of that.
All right. Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, yeah, I'd echo the comments that have already been made about Truck and Tractor Day, from the weather to the expansion of the activities that were there and the number of people, an exceptional community event. Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to be available on Saturday for the legislative retreat, so I will not be there.
Ms. Barth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended the Pierce County Council meeting last Tuesday at the Pavilion in the Park, and Deputy Mayor Whalen was there and gave a very nice presentation. And I stayed until the end and got to watch the door go up and down. It was pretty cute. So it was well attended and very good comments about the pavilion and the city of Lakewood and our roads. Lots of positive feedback. So thank you.
Mr. Simpson. See, I got it.
We had it.
You
Oh, there
turned
we
it
go.
off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I ditto the comments on Truck and Tractor Day. That was a lot of fun. I don't know if the deputy mayor wants to speak to this, and he's certainly welcome to, but last Tuesday morning, I had a 53-minute interview with an organization that I believe the deputy mayor and I had basically signed up for about imaging of the city. And I was impressed with the level of the questioning. It was very clear to me that my interviewer was very well prepared for this, and I thought, I can only speak for myself here, I thought it was well conducted, and I think the city was well represented. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Whalen.
Well, last week was one of those, I don't say crazy weeks, but it was a crazy week. It was after a late Monday night. I went to coffee with the deputy mayor as opposed to the mayor, who was gallivanting somewhere.
I know when to leave town.
Yeah, and so I did that in the morning, and we had a good I-5 JBLM overview from the WashDOT representatives. The one takeaway from that is the interesting sort of donut approach with huge concrete structures that we saw about a year and a half ago is no more. They really streamlined the infrastructure build that's going to be for the two interchanges at Berkeley and Thorn Lane. It looks very different. They're telling us it's going to operate better. They're saving a bunch of money. They're doing it through a design build concept. So it's, I think, kind of radically different. They say it's going to be better. We'll see. Then we went from that to the interview, and I agree with Mr. Simpson. It was an interesting communication with the gentleman. My mind is a blur, but I don't recall. We had hired this company to do some branding and imaging review and analysis for us. I think they've talked to a lot of folks in the community, and I look forward to receiving back the report to see where we are, where we think we are with regard to our branding and imaging. So I gave our 2 cents in an honest hour block of time, so it was a good go of it. Wednesday, I'm sure we had our meeting that night. Thursday, I attended with the city manager of the EDB board retreat, and we discussed a lot of the Economic Development Board's work plan, how we're doing, successes we've had, and thoughts from the group assembled as to kind of next steps. Much of the conversation there was truly about branding as well, and the need to kind of collaborate and have a more focused attention toward the marketing and branding of our region and what we have to offer as a comparative advantage. So it was, I think, well done. Friday, I flew out to Nashville, Tennessee, which was kind of interesting. Came back this morning, got up about 3 this morning to get get on a plane flight to be here with all of you. So I'm having a great time. Wednesday this week, we have on the school board piece as part of the CELT. Oh, I had that last week too. I think that was Tuesday evening after the Pierce County thing that I presented at. That was at 7 o'clock from the 5 o'clock. There is something that Holly's heading up. It's called something PCC. I forget the darn acronym. It's worse than the military. Parent something conference. And so we're supposed to attend that and have kind of a listening view toward what parents believe that they need or want to have from their school district and the community. And it would be interesting to know whether the district has seen the results of the survey yet from JBLM, because I'm sure that there will be some military parents there. So anyway, on the 18th is the Pierce County Regional Council. I still think there's a meeting on Thursday. Is that right? It's on the calendar. I may need some assistance with the alternative member that evening because I have another major firm event in my day job, because we were recognized as a cool place to work in the South Sound Business Magazine. If you haven't seen it, you might want to take a look at it. So it was quite good. But other than that, it was a good and busy week and a good and busy weekend where I met the in-laws, the potential in-laws. So I did watch the movie Meet the Fockers the week before I went down to Tennessee, and I had a good laugh at that. So,
and they were watching it too.
Yeah, exactly.
They were living it.
Yeah, they were living it. That's true.
So as I indicated, I think I picked a good week to eat my way through Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. Except that we were threatened with a hurricane, which never came, so we were in good shape. As I mentioned, Marty Schaefer from school board called about the groundbreaking and asking me to speak, and commented, a cordial conversation, commented on improving relations between the city and communications with the city. There is one point, I think, my personal opinion, that we as community leaders may need to offer some suggestions on, and that's the superintendent search. It appears that the majority of the school board is dead set against a national search and wants to hire, just look internally. And if I've done that before. I've done a school superintendent hiring where we hired an internal candidate after a national search. His natural advantage of knowing the district and his familiarity with the comfort level gives an internal candidate an obvious head start. But if they can't compete against outside folks, you shouldn't have the job. So what are you afraid of? More to come on that, I'm sure. And when I was in Savannah, I ended up going out to lunch and taking a tour of the Savannah City Hall with Glenn Hull, who was a former Fife City Council member and briefly for 6 weeks mayor, because about 2 days after he was elected by mayor, his wife was going to get transferred with Boeing, got a killer job with Gulfstream in Savannah, so they packed up and went, and he went back to school at Georgia Southern, got an MPA, and went into the city administration business, and he's a brand new hire at City Hall in Savannah. So it was a nice reunion. We served, he was on Pierce County Regional Council, and I served with him on the Pierce Transit Board. So readjusting to bugs and very fattening food. But it was a good visit. And comparing the similarities and differences of here and there when he has an insider's view of both. So it was enlightening. Anything else before we go to executive session? So we will now recess into executive session for approximately 20 minutes pursuant to RCW 4231.10(1)I to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation to which the agency is a party when public knowledge regarding the discussion is likely to result in an adverse legal or financial consequence to the agency. The council is expected to take final action following the executive session. So when we come back, we will take action. Yep, we will come back out here. So we're in recess for 20 minutes. Where is that?
Who would make the presentation? It wouldn't be us, it's a staff deal. It would be Courtney Cassie probably, or who? Pierce County folks doing that? Okay.
Here. Here's the stuff that needs returning.